The House will be in order. Messages from the Senate, the clerk will read.
Announcing passage of House Bill 2495 as amended by Senate Substitute for House Bill 2495. And the Senate adopts a Conference Committee report on House Bill 2510.
Speaker recognizes the Majority Leader for motion to suspend Joint Rule 4K.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Pursuant to subsection K of Joint Rule 4 of the Joint Rules of the Senate and House of Representatives, I move the rules be suspended for the purpose of considering Senate Bill 19, Senate Sub for House Bill 2495, House Bill 2510, and House Bill 2106.
You've heard the motion. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Motion passes. Speaker recognizes Representative Lamer for motion to adopt the Conference Committee report on Senate Bill 19.
Mr. Speaker, this Senate Bill 19 is our bill on the 988, which we did pass out of this House to the Senate. The Senate did not choose to work on it. So I would move adoption of the Conference Committee report on Senate Bill 19.
Representative Ruiz.
I urge everyone to please vote yes on this, on Senate Bill 19. It is long overdue for our state, and I know it's something that is federally mandated, but Kansas, I believe, has the unique structure for this bill. We've got 26 community mental health centers in the state. We've got the infrastructure that is needed for this. We already have entities that are running hotlines, helplines, and this would just bring it all together. I think it's going to be one of the best things that we will be able to do this year as far as innovation and really speaking to mental health crisis, and also being able to include those with a cognitive disorder. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Finch.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the body. This bill came out of the Utilities Committee, but it did not start there. This is the work product of the House Health Committee, and the chairwoman who did a yeoman's work in putting this together with her committee. The 988 bill will help save lives. It is an important and critical piece of mental health and crisis response in our state. I would note that this is only the beginning of the work. We have $10 million in the budget that you'll be hearing in just a little bit to help start the program, but we will need a dedicated funding source in the future. The House Utilities Committee took out the cell phone surcharge of 50 cents per line, and we replaced that with a state general fund appropriation this year, but depending on other policy choices that the legislature makes in the future, we do need to have a dedicated funding stream for this important service because it is critical to helping Kansans who find themselves in mental health crisis. So I want to thank the Health Committee and the chairwoman for her work and ask that you support this Conference Committee report on Senate Bill 19. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, Representative, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have to say it has been an honor to have the privilege to work on the mental health legislation that we've passed the last couple 2 years, and this is another anchor for us, and it was done with a lot of support from a lot of people on different committees, so I would move adoption of Senate Bill 19.
This constitutes final action on Senate Bill 19. The clerk will open the roll, and you may record your vote. Has every member had the opportunity to record their vote? The clerk will close the roll. Does any member desire to explain his or her vote? Does any member desire to change his or her vote? Representative Jacobs votes no. Any further changes? Does any member desire to explain his or her vote? With 112 voted in favor and 6 against the passage of Senate Bill 19, and same have received a constitutional majority, the bill is hereby declared passed. The clerk will record the vote. Speaker recognizes Representative Adam Smith for motion to adopt the Conference Committee report on Senate Bill 331.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to adopt the Conference Committee report on Senate Bill 331. Body, Senate Bill 331 used to be House Bill 2316. If you remember, a year ago, it was actually March 30th, we passed House Bill 2316 in this chamber, 90-34. This is a credit card surcharge repeal of the prohibition of surcharges. Now, it's a double negative, so it's a little bit confusing. Currently in Kansas law, there is a section that prohibits surcharges if you use your credit card to pay. This bill here repeals that statute. Several states have enacted a similar prohibition statute in the last 10 years, and it gets turned over. It's ruled unconstitutional. The state of Kansas actually had a lawsuit, CardX versus the state, that was recently ruled on. But essentially what's going on here is we're allowing the retailers to add a surcharge to your bill if you're using a credit card to pay. If you're paying with cash, that obviously doesn't apply. I actually kind of like this bill because I think it's going to encourage people to not whip out the plastic quite so much and maybe avoid some of those finance fees and late fees when you can't get your credit card bill paid. But Mr. Speaker, with that, I think I will, do want to say what the Senate changed on it is they added some disclosure requirements. If you're a storefront, you need to put a notice in your front window that those charges apply and what credit cards they apply to. And if you're doing retail business online, your website, homepage, and your point of sale on your checkout cart needs to show and explain what those charges are and which cards they apply to. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I'll stand for questions.
Representative Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This bill, everybody has a different opinion about surcharges. I, in fact, think it's a pretty good bill, but everyone else make your own decision on whether you support it or not. And by the way, the chairman always does a great job in explaining his bills. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to make a couple comments. For one thing, I see a lot of businesses must be in violation because I see this already. Some places where they'll add on a service charge, but the places who don't, it's actually passing some of the fees on to cash customers, because if you're paying the same cash or credit and it's costing a processing fee to the merchant for the credit, then it's driving up the price of doing business, and actually everyone's paying for it now, no matter how they, what manner they use to pay their check. But anyway, I do support this bill because of that. I think it really is more fair to people who choose to use a card, which I do quite a bit myself. And like I said, I stand in support of this. Thank you, Mr. Chair, or Mr. Speaker.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, Representative, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the representative from Sandhill Plum, Mulberry, stated, you know, a lot of people have wondered if this is going to be a fee increase or a tax increase, and as the representative stated, right now a lot of these fees are already baked into the price. So hopefully our retailers will, if they're adopting this, they'll give you a little bit of a discount on cash customers. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I move that we adopt the conference committee report on Senate Bill 331.
This constitutes final action on Senate Bill 331. The clerk will open the roll and you may record your vote. Has every member had the opportunity to record their vote? The clerk will close the roll. Does any member desire to explain his or her vote? Does any member desire to change his or her vote? Final action, members will be in their seats. 91 voted in favor and 26 against the passage of Senate Bill 331. The same have received a constitutional majority. The bill is hereby declared passed. The clerk will record the vote. Speaker recognizes Representative Waymaster for motion to adopt the conference committee report on House Bill 2510.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move the adoption of House Bill 2510. Colleagues, this is the omnibus budget bill. And I will say from the onset, and I think I said this when we debated Senate Bill 267, latter part of last month, that our course of direction and action for this year was to pay off debt, put money away in savings, and then have a one-time investment. That's what we looked at when we were going through the budgets this year, given the surplus that we had when we started this legislative session. So the first thing, we paid off debt. We paid $332.2 million in two bonds. Those two bonds are the 2015A and 2015G bonds. The 2015A is the John Redmond Reservoir and the University of Kansas Medical Center Education Building, and the Series 2015G is the National Bio and Agro Defense Facility in Manhattan. So that's two bonds that we paid off. The next was we paid off the bond for the KBI Forensic Science Lab. So there's another debt service that we will no longer have anymore. And then after paying off the bonds, we decided to put some money into savings. And you'll recall in Senate Bill 267 in the initial budget bill, we put $500 million into the Budget Stabilization Fund, or the Rainy Day Fund as it's commonly called. This time the Appropriations Committee and the Senate agreed with what the Appropriations Committee decided on Tuesday, excuse me. We put an additional $250 million into the Budget Stabilization Fund. So right now the balance of the Budget Stabilization Fund for the state of Kansas to prepare ourselves if there's a calamity or we have a recession is going to be $750 million in the Rainy Day Fund. We did put some additional money, about $12.5 million, into higher ed. And then we also dispersed some ARPA funds, the American Rescue Plan Act money, for $15 million for nursing homes across the state of Kansas, our community colleges, because in 267, we did have an allocation for some of the community colleges in the state, but not all 19 across the state. And so the Senate had a position of allocating some ARPA money to those community colleges and technical schools that did not receive money in Senate Bill 267. We also put some money towards our regional universities. That would be Fort Hays, Pittsburgh, and Emporia. That was the $5 million each, again, ARPA money. And then there was also $3 million for Washburn University. And then we also had some economic development projects throughout the state. If you recall, one of the line item vetoes in Senate Bill 267 was the Benedictine Engineering Program. And so we replaced that money with the $200,000 that was vetoed, and we used the language that the governor used in her veto message of where those funds should come from. And so that's where those funds are being directed for the Benedictine Engineering Program. One thing that we did that we have not done for quite some time, and that is we did upgrades at the Kansas State Fair. Total package for the Kansas State Fair is almost $14.6 million. $10 million of that is going towards the renovation of the Bison Arena. $2.5 million is going for a milling overlay. $500,000 for the 4-H Hall and Oz Gallery. $450,000 for the Expo Center, and then we need a public address system at the Kansas State Fair, which would cost $100 million to incorporate that system. We also took the Senate position with the regional inpatient mental health bed expansion for South Central Kansas, and this would also be contingent on the State Finance Council approval after the interim study is reviewed, and then they would release the $15 million for the mental health bed expansion. We did have some pay adjustments. They're listed in the information that you received on your desk on the floor, but some of the groups that we addressed in regards to pay adjustments from the others on 267 was the Board of Indigent Defense Services, some members of or employees with a 24/7 pay plan, the local community corrections agencies, that was actually a GBA, the state fire marshal, and then we also had an increase for those that keep this building maintained for the Capitol Complex housekeeping. We also accepted the human caseloads for 22 and 23, and then we also appropriated $1.6 million for the Highway Patrol to purchase 2 forward-looking infrared radars. And then as you just heard in the previous bill, I believe Senate Bill 19 with the 988 suicide hotline, we did put the funding in to implement the 988 suicide prevention hotline. So with that being said, those are some of the highlights. Obviously, there's more information in the documents that were at your desk, but I'm very pleased. The ending balance for the state of Kansas, factoring in all the bills that have passed, including CAPERS, APEX, some tax bills, even the food sales tax bill that we have not heard yet, we are ending fiscal year 2023 with an ending balance of $1.6 billion. And that would be a 12.7% ending balance. And that's also including putting the additional $250 million into the budget stabilization fund. So not only do we have almost $1.2 billion in our ending balance, we have that $750 million in our budget stabilization fund, so we can be prepared and be financially responsible if a recession were to happen. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I would take any questions.
Representative Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We have money to hand out to anybody and everybody. We have a closing balance in the billions of dollars. We hand out $1.3 billion for APEX. Meanwhile, the price of food goes up and up and up. Working Kansans can't afford it. Parents with children can't afford it. People on fixed incomes can't afford it. But we've got money for everything else except to eliminate the sales tax on food. It's preposterous, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Representative Wolfmore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I stand in support of this budget. Really, I can't add a lot to the points that our chair made in regard to the budget, but to summarize, I think its fiscal health has returned to the state of Kansas over the last few years. I mean, as he mentioned, we have got ourselves in great position in the event of a downturn. We have got plenty of money set aside in our rainy day fund. We have a great ending balance, and we're paying off debt. Just the things we would do in our families if we were preparing for a very difficult times. One thing I just want to highlight is now everyone should be getting a 5% pay increase. And something that was added on in our committee was an additional 5% for our Capitol Complex housekeeping staff. So they get the 5 plus an additional 5. I think that is very appropriate given the work they've had to do to keep this place clean and sanitized over the last few years. So this is probably the first time they're hearing about that, so I hope they go go home and celebrate tonight. Additionally, the community colleges were mentioned, so now every community college had an opportunity to get some money for a economic development project. There were 4 that did not get any money, but I'll make it very clear that those 4 did not apply for it. You had to have a matching fund and you had to have a project in mind. So every community college and every technical college had an opportunity to get some of these funds. I'm particularly thrilled also that higher ed got an additional $12.5 million in this omnibus budget. So that brings them to a total of $37.5. So I think we've done the right thing by higher ed, and I think that's going to pay dividends in the future. One thing we did also is we stabilized the state health plan. In years, probably 7 or 8 years ago, we had to lower the employer contribution and put that on the backs of the employees because of the state of that plan. So that was very unfair to them. At the same time, we weren't giving them raises. They were paying more for their health care. So with this additional $10 million in the budget, hopefully that keeps us from ever being in that situation, in the near future at least, of having to put this extra cost on their backs. Let me see what else I haven't mentioned. Oh, we also added $1.5 million for Meals on Wheels, so taking care of our seniors. So I think that was a very worthwhile add. I can't think of anything else I need to tell you at this point. It's probably been talked about in your caucuses, but I think this is a good budget, and I'm very pleased and proud to vote yes for it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Helgerson.
Mr. Speaker, I have an amendment. What, can I offer an amendment? Oh, that's right. We skipped that process. We have made, no, we didn't. We didn't have a chance to amend this bill. This is not the first time, or the second time, or the third time that the legislature is being shut out of the opportunity of fully debating the issue and having a chance to amending things. Now, I'm getting tired of being the only one down here screaming about it. It's your rights. It's your opportunity to say the budget's too high or the budget's too low. It used to be that we would always, and I mean always, the omnibus bill would go from the committee to the House floor, and it would be debated on and then sent to conference. It is now becoming the process that we are being shut out on a regular basis. Now, why does that matter? Maybe it doesn't matter to some of you. The bill comes up on a regular basis, the last part of the night, quite often it's midnight, and nobody cares. I can see people reading different magazines or looking at the messages. But what happens in the dead of night is that things get put in the omnibus bill that probably shouldn't be there. You know, in the omnibus, in the appropriation process, I introduced a bill earlier in the year. It had to deal with ARPA funds, the $700 and some million that we got into the state that was decided on last year as an emergency. We're going to set up all these committees to give the funding away, give the money away. I said, they didn't give it away. So the appropriation process should be put in place to deal with those funds. It shouldn't be given to some other individuals. It shouldn't be given to a few legislators to influence how that money is given rather than having all of us together. So what happens? If you look at how the ARPA funds have been given, certain elected officials had the opportunity of influencing it more than others. If you look at what the Senate did, the Senate put in $70+ million, even though the House was told, we can't use those funds for general appropriations. They put them in at the end, and our conference committee agreed with it. You know, if we had put that $700 million in, we would have been able to cut state general fund spending by $700 million, and we would have funded the sales tax. You know, beginning of this year, I said, we make decisions that have significant consequences on the budget and the taxes at the same time. And you can't spend the money twice. What has happened is we made the decision that a year ago, when I made that 2% cut that, you know, everybody got crazy about, that 2%, when that 2% was added, we brought in approximately $3 billion more money in projected revenue. How much money did we put into taxes? I think when I asked the question earlier in our caucus, it was $200 million. Look at Iowa. Look at the other states when they had this significant amount of money. They made different policy decisions. And they made those decisions because they looked at it all, and they didn't have an opportunity to just have a few people make those decisions. They had a broad spectrum of people that could make the decisions together. Our system is getting corrupted. And if you don't know it, and if you don't see it, stand back and look at what other states are doing. Because when a few people can step in and put $20 million for their specific appropriation at the end of the night for their city, the system is corrupted. It is more like Washington, D.C. and the pet projects that are put in than I've ever seen. Now, it matters because if you want general tax relief, you have an open process. And that open process gives you the opportunity to make unified decisions about, I want to have a general tax increase, a general tax reduction for sales or for corporations or for whatever. You know, I had a call from leadership earlier in the year, before the session even started, and I said, I thought there would be $3 billion that we'd have available. And I said $1 billion for capers, $1 billion for tax reductions, and $1 billion for the ending balances. We came far short in those tax reductions, I'll tell you that. And what has also happened, sorry, I got to put my glasses on. I asked research to give me some figures as to where we were at. State general fund expenditures, 22 to over 21 was 17.5%. 23 to 22 was another 7.5%, so about 25% increase in 2 years. Now, I know people will say it's one-time money. People will say that we use part of it for maybe for some purposes like ending balances. But if you add in the ARPA funds and the state general fund dollars, it's close to 30% increase in our spending. You know, I used to be a state senator. Don't hold that against me. But when I was a state senator and they decided to spend money, I said, you know, you spend money like drunken sailors, except you give drunken sailors a bad name. Well, I'm on a different planet, I'll tell you that, because I look at this appropriation bill and I see my respected colleagues up here, and they talk about how it's great that we put in all this money. I don't think so. I don't see that there is the performance measures that were put in. I think that we started a state hospital program, and no one has even brought it up other than me. And the lobbyist for Sedgwick County finally admitted a couple days ago that we're going to open a new state hospital, and the governor and the agency will not even admit it. Now, what does the state hospital mean? If you look back at what they talked about as how much it was going to cost in Osawatomie, they used figures of about $150 million in order to deal with a new hospital. Now, good old Sedgwick County, when they were told that they were going to have to put in, I think it was $15 million to match the funding that's in this bill, they said, we don't have any money. even though they received $100 million of ARPA funds and they received a big chunk of other funds, they don't have the money. It's that the state is going to have to pony up the bill. The state is now on the hook for a possible state hospital, and you haven't even talked about it. Man, I remember when we did a state prison a few years ago, and I made sure that you heard about it. These are the kind of questions that you should be asking. And whether or not we want to go the direction of higher spending and keeping a good reserve, I agree. Or do we want to have a smaller increase in our spending and have lower taxes? Yeah, I'm passionate about all this because I see the greatest opportunity we've ever had as a state, and I see that we didn't take advantage of it. As you can tell, I'm not going to be supporting the bill. And if I have a chance to be back here next year, I'll tell you one thing I'm going to do right from the beginning. I'm going to introduce legislation that forces us to have a full discussion of the bills early in the session, as opposed to putting them off and not having the discussion or putting it off till the end of the session. Thank you.
Representative Owsley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, body. And I feel like I've been up here a lot today. However, I was never a state senator. But I got to get up here and I got to talk about not only what the previous speaker was saying and the process that this is going through, because I too would like to have an amendment right now. When I substituted on appropriations for the day when they were first discussing this, I carried 2 amendments or substitute motions in that committee dealing with special education funding. According to the Kansas Department of Education and a 2017 legislative post-audit, we are underfunding our special education despite what some in this room may calculate themselves. That number that we're underfunding is $155 million. With a 1.16 ending balance and $750 million in a rainy day fund, I really think we could have afforded that whole $155 million. The Appropriations Committee decided not to do that, so I offered the $68 million that this body had passed while we were having the debate upon the original K-12 funding. I think it's a shame the K-12 funding isn't part of this as well, so we could have had a clean K-12 bill without policy and appropriations mixed. But I also thought by offering that $68 million in appropriations, I would give folks another chance to increase the special ed funding, which again impacts every student in every district in the state of Kansas. The governor's recommendation, or the governor's budget amendment, was for $30 million. And here we are with a $1.1 billion ending balance, and we can't even give $30 million to our schools to cover special education excess cost. I think it's shameful. Thank you.
Representative Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to say that in the time that I've spent in the legislature, which frighteningly extends 40 years ago, I've watched the digression of the process become what you now are observing. In the time that I've been in the legislature, I don't feel like I've had a more relative role working with leadership than I have this year. And I very much appreciate, when I say leadership, I'm talking about both sides. I very much appreciate the input that I've been able to offer to the process. But my friend from Wichita is right. He's right in everything he just said. Just because he's old and gray like me doesn't mean that he shouldn't be listened to. To those of you that are relatively new and those that aren't, don't put up with this. When you come back and when you are asked for your support for leadership, get a commitment from those that seek leadership that they will not treat you like children. That's what this is. They don't trust you enough to allow for the process to be full, which includes the opportunity to amend. And my goodness, when you're in such control of the process, you shouldn't fear the opportunity for someone to offer an amendment and to have it fully debated, even if you do not support it. Your voters do not send you up here to simply take orders. Don't be sheep. When you disagree with leadership, be sure they understand that you disagree. And when you are cut out of the process, and again, this is not the process that we are supposed to follow, do something about it. And again, for those that seek a leadership position, please treat the 125 members as having a right to their opinion and the opportunity to present it. Do not be afraid of the people that you're in charge of. You're in charge of people. You should not be in control of them, because that is harmful to the legislative and the democratic process. And I wasn't going to get up here, but he's exactly right. It takes more than him to stand up and make these points, and I'm ashamed of myself. I haven't done more to do it. Don't put up with this process. It can work just as well when we are all fully included. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for everything.
Any further discussion? Seeing done, Representative, you may close.
Thank you, Speaker. One thing I'd like to clarify, and I think I did in my opening comments when I was talking about that with the regional mental health beds, is there's going to be an interim review board set up by the State Finance Council, and they're going to be analyzing the mental health beds in South Central Kansas. With that, Mr. Speaker, before I close, there are some people I want to thank, and I do want to thank all the members of the Appropriations Committee, all the members of the Senate Ways and Means Committee, the Chairman, Vice Chairman, and Ranking Member on the Senate Ways and Means Committee, and then also my Vice Chairman, and then my Ranking Member. It's always a pleasure working with you guys. I also want to give a huge shout out to Amy Deckard, our research analyst, and Jill Walters from the Revisor of Statutes, and all of the employees with the research department and the Revisor of Statutes. They were up here all night, last night, crafting this so we can have a vote for it today. So I want to say thank you for your diligence and your hard work in getting this prepared. I also want to thank my staff, my Chief of Staff, Jeffrey House is here, and then my Administrative Assistant, Marie Holt, who has already left, obviously. And then I do have some sad news. My committee assistant that I've had for the last 6 years, and actually the Speaker had her as a committee assistant for 2 years when he was Chairman of Appropriations. She's going to be leaving us. She's going to be moving to the state of Florida on May 27th, and she will no longer be a great asset to our office and to all the hard work that she did with our committee. She is a fantastic committee assistant, and she will be greatly missed. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I close on the Conference Committee report for House Bill 2510.
This constitutes final action on House Bill 2510. The clerk will open the roll, and you may record your vote. Has every member had the opportunity to record their vote? The clerk will close the roll. Does any member desire to explain his or her vote? Does any member desire to change his or her vote? With 95 voted in favor and 22 against, the passage of House Bill 2510, the same have received a constitutional majority. The bill is hereby declared passed. The clerk will record the vote. Speaker recognizes Representative Adam Smith for motion to adopt the Conference Committee report on House Bill 2106.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Body, I move to adopt the Conference Committee report on House Bill 2106. 2106 is the food sales tax bill, and I will briefly review the details of the bill as it stands. As of January 1st, 2023, the food sales tax statewide rate for food sales tax will go to 4% from the current 6.5. The following year, January 1st, 2024, it goes to 2%. And on January 1st, 2025, it goes to 0. In House Bill 2106, the State Highway Fund is adjusted from the current 16.154% to 17% January 1st, 2023, and 18% January 1st, 2025. The food sales tax credit currently existing in law will sunset after tax year 2024. The definition of food under House Bill 2106 is grocery food. Basically, it is non-prepared food. This is not a full exemption on sales tax on food. I've had numerous comments for the last 6 or 7 months on what the elimination of sales tax on food means. Currently, because of our membership in the Streamlined Sales Tax and Use Agreement, local governments will have to continue to charge their local rates on your sales tax on groceries, even once the state rate is phased out. I will let the body know that we are taking a look at that agreement because following the passage of our Marketplace Facilitator bill, we're going to take a look at our membership in that and see if that is even necessary, because that was a big part of why we were members in that agreement. If we can eliminate or cancel our membership in that, we can allow cities and counties to also, at their discretion, eliminate their sales tax on food as well. With that, Mr. Speaker, I would stand for questions.
Representative Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the tax chair for bringing this bill. We've been needing to do this bill for the last 40 years that I've been in the grocery business. And I will tell you, charging food sales tax is wrong. The surrounding states do not charge it, or they charge very little. So we've had a lot of grocers go out of business. I think my friends who represent those stores up on Highway 36 across the northern part of the state, and more so on the eastern part of the state, as the state of Missouri has loosened all their tax laws over there. We've suffered the loss of a lot of businesses, but you know what? When you're a small independent business and you go broke, it's okay. Not a big deal. You know what they say? Poor old Dave, he was a bad manager. Who's next? So Dave's gone. But anyhow, I'll save you the theatrics, but I will tell you this is kind of the Kitty Cooper bill. You know Kitty Cooper's the lady on TV who's getting a settlement from the insurance company, and the question is, how low can we go? Well, this bill's about it. We couldn't have done much less. But that's all right. I'm gonna choke this down. I've heard some comments from over here on the left wailing about the budget, the process. I'm not gonna beat that dead horse. So this is a good bill. Not a great bill. Could have been a great bill. We had the money in the bank in January. We could have taken food sales tax to 0 in January. But no. Once again, old Kitty Cooper, don't want to give her too much. So that's all right. I hope you join me in supporting this bill, and I hope we remember to go ahead and keep those reductions in place and make them happen. I've seen these things happen before in here where, out of sight, out of mind, and we've kind of had a change of heart and we decided we don't want to do that and we're going to back up. So I think it'll behoove everybody here to keep everybody's feet to the fire and make those reductions happen. And with that, I will go back and sit down and not bother you again. Thank you.
Representative Keither.
I think the question of the night is, how low can we go? And the answer is, we are not going as low as we should. We are letting the people of the state down, thinking that this bill, 2106, is the good answer for the people of Kansas. We should be eliminating the sales tax on food, period. Not just phasing it out, and they're saying, well, we've got to do this because the retailers can't handle it. Well, the grocers have told us differently. Yes, they can, and they can do it by July 1st. This should not be the House position. We're for the people. And we're settling for this, and all of a sudden we've been reminded, maybe occasionally when people have a changeover in this building, ideas change and maybe we won't go forward. This is not the answer. This is not enough. We are failing the people of Kansas and saying this is good enough for now. I'm ashamed that we're doing it this way. I just don't think this is a good way to go. And I'm sorry for the people of Kansas that we cannot do better.
Representative Stocksdale.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, we're in here tonight. We've blown it again. I wanted to start my remarks with just a quick geography lesson in Kansas. On the north state, on our state line on the north side, there is not one single major population center of Nebraska residents. On the Colorado side, there's not one single major population center in Colorado, of Colorado residents on our state line. On our Oklahoma line, there is not one single major population center of Oklahomans on that state line, but Missouri. On Missouri, along the Wyandotte-Johnson County line, there are 1.2 million Missourians who live right across the street from our districts. A population center that just on the Missouri side is the 36th largest in the entire United States of America. 1.2 million people. That represents 1/3 of the entire population of Kansas. And they have had the economic and common good sense to create a tax structure in that part of the metropolitan area that lures Kansans to come over there to spend their money on food and other products. And I happened to meet a guy at a party a couple weeks ago, very successful guy in marketing and advertising in Kansas City. And he said, well, what's going on in Topeka? What's going on in the legislature down there? And I said, well, we had the opportunity to take sales tax on food down to 0 this year. I said, but instead we're going to piecemeal it. And he said, you're going to piecemeal it? I said, yeah. He said, well, that's just stupid. Why are you going to do that? And I said, well, apparently that's the plan. And he said, are these people not aware of the power of 0? He said, if you're in advertising and marketing, 0 has a significant psychological impact on people. He said, if you took that sales tax down to 0, you would be in every major news outlet in the Midwest. He said, heck, you'd even be in the New York Times the next Sunday. That would be significant. It would be a real incentive for Missourians to come into Kansas and spend their money instead of vice versa. So, anyway, we could have been done 3 things, really. Incentivize Kansans to stay in Kansas to shop. I can't tell you how many people I know that go to the Missouri side. If they're on the Kansas or on the Missouri side of the Kansas City Metro, they stop, they buy groceries, they buy gasoline, they buy other products, and a lot of that reason is because they have a better tax code on food and other products than we do on the Kansas side. So we could keep those people in Kansas and spend their money in Kansas instead of going across the state line in Missouri. It would also incentivize Missourians, as I say, to come to Kansas. We'd keep Kansans in Kansas. We'd incentivize Missourians to come into Kansas and spend their money. And we'd also put $411 million in sales tax savings into the pockets of Kansans, where they could spend that money on other products and services in Kansas and pay sales tax on it. And what are we going to do? Piecemeal it. I kind of have to agree with my friend in marketing and advertising. That's just stupid. So I hope you will consider a no vote on this, and let's correct this and take it to zero and really make an impact where we can, the only place we can in Kansas, and that would be significant. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Osman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The carrier of the bill called this the food sales tax bill, and that's a misnomer. It's not the food sales tax bill. It's a food sales tax bill. We had another one. It was introduced from the idea of the governor and brought about in a co-sponsored in a bipartisan fashion. We introduced it in January, and it went nowhere. It would have eliminated the food sales tax altogether. It would have saved Kansans, every individual Kansan, including all of you, more than $500 per year. And sometimes when I say this, I would say, you know, just $500 if you spend $150 per week or something like that. But inflation has increased grocery prices up to 9% across the board. People are paying more per groceries right now than they ever have in their entire life. And you would save, and your constituents would save, and every Kansan would save over $500 per year. It went nowhere. 2 days ago, we had a vote on whether we wanted to bring this to a debate, not the question of whether we wanted to pass that bill, HB 2487, not whether we wanted to pass it, whether we wanted to discuss it, to debate it, to negotiate on it. And 74 of you in this room said no. I did not want to even discuss the bill. 2 days later, we're here. Apparently, we do want to discuss it, just not that bill. And I will probably vote yes on this bill because I've learned from Sesame Street that something is better than nothing. And this little bit is probably better than nothing at all. But we had the opportunity for more. And if you voted to not discuss it 2 days ago, to not debate it 2 days ago, and you're going to support this bill today, what it says to me is that you did want to discuss it, you did want to debate it. The only thing that was concerned to you was whose idea it was. And that's not how we should be doing things. So thank you.
Representative Bergkamp.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I guess I'm going to approach this bill from a little different perspective and appreciate everybody's comments and also the work of the chairman and everybody else on this. It was a interesting committee this year. So during the course of the committee, we heard from several different, I guess, tax policy experts. And to me, I think the one thing that stood out most was, you know, they kind of reiterated any good tax economist would say to broaden the base and lower the overall rate, which unfortunately, I think when we talk about eliminating this sales tax on food, what we're doing is narrowing the tax base. So what's going to happen in future years, if we need to raise more revenues, we're going to have to raise the overall rate, which is not a position I think that we want to be in. So one of my propositions was, I think, instead of eliminating the sales tax on food, I would propose that we just lower the overall rate from 6.5% to 5.5%, which would roughly be equivalent, I think, on a fiscal note perspective. And also, when you do the math for your lowest two income earners, like on the Bureau of Labor Statistics, they would pay a little bit more by reducing the overall rate, but it wouldn't be significant. However, I think you'd set yourself up for better down the road as well. And additionally, it would make the most sense. So anyways, I would just propose that we think about at some point lowering the overall rate and not just narrowing our base here. And also, I think a lot of focus has been on grocery stores, but I don't see this helping our other retail stores, you know, like hardware, electronics, I mean, there's a lot of other businesses out there besides grocery. And if you look at the numbers as well, people in America only spend 15% of their income on food. So it's a pretty small percentage. And even the poorest of people spend 25% of their income at restaurants. So this lowering the sales tax on food isn't going to benefit that part. So there's just, I think, more that would be good that we think about besides focusing on the food. And I just wanted to bring that to light here today. So thank you for your time.
Representative Wagoner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I support this bill, this HB 2106, on reducing the food sales tax. But I'm also, like other speakers, have been concerned about the process and just how things are done. I wish we had done this earlier in the session. I would think as Republicans, speaking as a Republican, I know you're not all there, I think you'd be looking at cutting taxes first and then figuring out what your spending is. When you look at what we've done here, and I'm thinking over the last 4 years since I've been here in Topeka, you know, when I came in with, and a number of you also came in 2019, our fiscal state general fund budget was just right at $7 billion. Here in 4 years, we've gone to $9.2 billion, a 31% increase. And I know sitting back, as I was just a layperson in Hutchinson, Kansas, and I had a column that I wrote for the Hutchinson News. You know, I would talk about tax and spending in Topeka. And the reason you can't cut taxes as much is because spending has gone so high. Taxes and spending are two sides of the same coin. The changes you make in one inevitably will affect the other. The more you increase spending inevitably is going to lead to a future tax increase, or it's going to make it so you would reduce taxes less or be able to adjust them for inflation. You know, we are doing a number of things, but a lot of things I'd heard discussed here that have not come up as far as adjusting the standard deduction on our state income taxes, adjusting things for inflation, the differential that we have between what you have on your federal tax return and your state. I think the comments that came earlier on a previous bill from our colleagues in Topeka and Wichita, I think spoke a lot of truth. You know, I run a business, I'm very much a numbers type of person, and a lot of this stuff is totally confusing. The information that I would really like to have, I don't get. Things are handled here at the very end of session where everybody's tired, people are thinking about going home. I mean, we're really not giving this a consideration that we give other bills, and I think that's really a shame. Again, I love our people on appropriations. We have some excellent people here that do understand the numbers and such, but it's so few. I think as a body, we operate in the fog on tax and spending issues. I don't think it has to be that way, and I really hope the consensus here on both sides of the aisle is that needs to change, and that in future sessions that we will actually do better, being more transparent, particularly on issues of taxing and spending. And thank you so much for your comments, or for your time.
Representative Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The rate of inflation in the United States is at the highest rate it has been since 1982, if not before. Families cannot afford to buy food. People on fixed income cannot afford to buy food. We know from the grocers that we can, in fact, eliminate the sales tax on food effective July 1 of this year. We have plenty of money to do it with. Our conference committee members have let us down because they did not demand that we eliminate the sales tax on food effective July 1. Accordingly, I make a substitute motion that the conference committee report not be adopted and that a new conference committee be appointed so that we can reduce the sales tax on food to zero effective July 1 of this year. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
This is a fully debatable motion. Representative Carmichael, you still have the floor.
On the motion, Mr. Speaker, it's clear that we can do this, we can afford it, and we can do it now. Thank you.
Anybody wish to speak to the motion? Representative Adam Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to remind the body that the conference committee is a joint effort. We have a House position, we have a Senate position, and I'd just like to remind everybody what some of those Senate positions were. The bill that we came up with was a long way toward what the House had kicked out of committee, and our initial offer was even much more aggressive, knowing that we had a long way to compromise with the Senate position. So here's some of the things that the Senate had kicked out. Implementation date of January 1st, 2024. It included prepared food, restaurant food. There was no adjustment in the state highway fund distribution formula. The transportation plan could have been put at risk because of the cut in funds. It removes sales tax also on commercial utilities, not just food. Total fiscal note that we were up against in conference committee negotiating, the Senate's plan upon full implementation was $786.6 million. The House conference team worked hard on trying to negotiate our position, and I think we did a good job. We've got a bill that eliminates the state sales tax on food. It steps it down, it phases it out, it's not immediately. When we asked Department of Revenue in committee, how long does it take to implement? They told us 60 to 90 days. Well, right now we're right at the minimum on that 60 days. And I tell you what, if you talk to some convenience store owners, they're going to have to do some major changes with their point-of-sale systems, because when it comes to prepared food and non-prepared food, they have a lot of both, and it's going to be confusing. It's not just a matter of changing the rate in their computer. They're going to have to go into each item define whether or not it's a taxable or a non-taxable item. It's going to take time, especially if you're a small mom and pop store that doesn't have the corporate software already loaded in. It's going to take time. July 1st at this point is not attainable. But I think January 1st of 23 is a lot better than January 1st of 2024. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Majority Leader Hawkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My friends, we've come a long way from the start of this session. When we started this session, we talked about three things. We talked about putting money away. We've done that. We talked about lowering our debt and capers, and we'll get that done. And we talked about lowering taxes. Whenever we start talking about lowering taxes, we always have to be careful. We always have to hedge maybe just a little bit on the conservative side, because bad things can happen. We've had downturns in our economy before, and we'll have them again, and they're probably not very far away. And the way this is structured allows us to be careful. We just need to continue this process. We don't need to send it back to conference. Let's get this thing done. Every one of you want this vote. We need this vote. So let's get this vote. So let's vote no on this motion.
Does anyone else wish to speak to the motion? You can close, but we'll see if anybody else wants to speak first. Seeing no one else, Representative, you may close on your motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, if they can reprogram their cash register to raise the price 2 or 3 times a week or a month, they can reprogram their cash register to just strike the 6.5% at the bottom. So I urge you to vote yes on the motion and send this back to the conference committee, and let's just see if we can't do it. Thank you.
As a reminder, a yes sends it back to conference, a no puts us back on the bill. All in favor of the Carmichael amendment, say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. No. The noes appear to have it. Division has been requested. And roll call. The clerk will open the roll. This is a roll call vote. Has every member had the opportunity to record their vote? The clerk will close the roll. 39 voted in favor, 75 against. The motion fails. We're back on the bill. Representative Chuck Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As a young man, as a kid, I grew up in Atchison, Kansas, which is right on the river. And my dad owned a liquor store. And everybody crossed the river to buy their whatever in Missouri because the taxes were cheaper. So I grew up with it. I always saw it, and I lived it. One day I drove back from Pittsburgh. When I come up from Pittsburgh, I hit 435, and then I get on the Missouri side, and then I go through Weston to Atchison. And I stopped and got gas, and gas was 10 cents a gallon cheaper. And I got home, and I told Dad, I saved 10 cents a gallon. He said, Chuck, that doesn't help your highways here in Kansas. Kansas highways are much better than Missouri highways. So yeah, they got lower taxes. We got better roads. Much better roads. You know, I wasn't here, but in 2012, the governor cut the LLCs down to 0. We were talking about 0. And because of that, the state got in trouble, and a couple years later, we had to add that back on, which made it a hardship. Where if the governor had gone a third, and a third, I think it would have been successful. I think it would have brought new businesses into Kansas, and we'd be talking very positive about Governor Brownback. I think this is a smart thing. We're reducing it, we're giving it time to work, and we're going to see what's happened. So I appreciate my friend from Western Kansas, what they do on the tax committee, and I think this is a good thing for Kansas. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Gartner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know it's late. I'm not going to take very long. I appreciate all the work the tax committee did this year, and my chairman and vice chairman. I appreciate you. As the chairman pointed out, we did work very hard and diligently in conference. But then again, I'm going to go back and talk a little bit about 2487 the other day when I made a motion to pull it out of committee. The chairman of tax committee made an offer, and the House offer, and I think I mentioned this the other day, was 5% effective July 22 and 1.5% July 23. And I felt like that was a very responsive first initial offer. And the response from the Senate was, we would love to do that. Oh, gosh, would we love to do that. But our leadership, oh boy, I don't know. I'm not sure that our leadership would allow us to do that. I just shook my head and looked at my chairman and went, I can't believe what's happening here. That was my whole point the other day. The process, as some of my colleagues have already pointed out this evening, the process is broken. We don't debate bills. We don't amend bills on the floor, tax bills, especially tax bills. You've already heard, we do have the money. We can do this. I know the chairman said 60 to 90 days on retail. KDOR has been working with those retailers since last November. They knew this was coming, that a reduction was on its way. They can do it really in probably 30 days, so we can do it. This was my #1 priority this year, and I'm as passionate as my colleague from Sedgwick on the budget process, and I'm very passionate, and I just feel, before I sit down, I'm just gonna say that I feel like we were all run over on this issue. We could have done it, and to be quite honest, I'm really ashamed. I'm ashamed for my constituents, and I hope you feel the same way, that you're ashamed, that we could have done a heck of a lot better for our constituents this year. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Garber.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When I came in 2011, we cut taxes in 2012. We thought it was the right thing to do, and I still do, because it wasn't because of the tax cuts that we got in trouble. It's because for 3 years in a row,
our economy grew at 0.3%, when the average was 3.6 up to that time. 12 times less than what it had been. If it had even been half, we wouldn't be having this discussion today, because we would have already cut food sales tax to zero. So we have to know the whole story when we get up here and talk. We did the right thing in 2012. It didn't work out because of the economy. Now, many of you may not know either that in 2012, we passed food sales tax to zero out of this House. They passed it out of the Senate, and it was taken out in conference committee. So we need to know some history, folks, before we get up here and talk. I wish it was to zero today. I'm going to have to vote for this because it's all they gave us. But we spent too much this year and didn't cut taxes enough. All you got to do is look at the history of our spending, and it doesn't matter who's on the second floor. We spend and we spend and we spend. 3 years before I came in, we had $1 billion in the bank. It was overspent, $500 million. The general fund budget was overspent, $500 million, than expenses for 3 years in a row. So when Governor Brownback came in, we had less than $1,000 in the bank. State of Kansas had less than $1,000 in the bank. So we've got to know history, and we've got to know what's going on. We can't just look at now. We have to look back and see what we've done. And it's my opinion that we spend too much. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Sawyer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, I rise in support of this bill, but I really do hope this isn't all we provide this year. You know, I was one of the co-sponsors of House Bill 2487, one of the bills that cut the food sales tax to zero. I believe we can take it to zero this year. We have a solid budget. You know, I've been here a long time, and this is the most solid budget I've ever seen. You know, we just did the budget bill, 12.7% ending balance, and a $750 million stabilization fund. Those together, that's over 20% sitting in the bank. We're fully funding KDOT. We're not borrowing money from anymore. We're funding CAPERS. We're fully funding our schools. We're paying off debt. The CRE just met and increased revenues by $760 million over the next 2 years. We can afford to go to zero. Going to zero is $455 million. We can afford to go to zero this year. The thing that the good part about this bill is it does eventually get us to zero. It takes us till 2025, but at least we get there. But the worst part of this bill to me is the fact that there is no relief in 2022. We're not providing any relief right now. People in Kansas are hurting right now. They're dealing with inflation, high gas prices, high grocery prices. They need relief now. We shouldn't make them wait till 2023. We can and we must do better. You know, I will say the House, I'm going to give kudos to the House conferees. When this, as a couple of the representatives mentioned, when the conference committee first started meeting, the House offered what I thought was a good compromise. I believe we should go to zero this year, but the House offered a 5% reduction this year and 1.5% the next year. Now, that was a great compromise. We could live with that. That's how the conference committee started. And somehow, we get to the end of the process, we end up with this bill. It's very, very frustrating. We end up with zero relief in 2022. We cut it 2.5% in 2023, 2% in 24, and 2% in 25. That's very frustrating. Now, I am supporting this bill because, I'm one of those people, when my stocks go up or people invest money, I say, sell some of it, bank those profits. Well, that's what I feel like this bill does. We at least put in place some kind of tax cut. But the reality is we have time to do more. This is only day 79, I think. It's late, it's tired, I'm not sure, but rounds of day 79 of the session. You know, in 2013, we were here 99 days. We stayed 99 days to raise taxes. In 2015, we stayed 113 or 114 days to raise taxes. And in that tax conference committee report, that's when we raised the sales tax to 6.5% to give us the second highest rate on food in the whole country. So we've stayed a long time to raise taxes. Now, we know we're coming back. We know we've got to have at least a veto session 2. We might have a veto session 3 because we got to get maps passed. So while we're passing maps, and hopefully we're getting medical marijuana done too, I'll throw that in there, we have time to provide more tax relief. I believe this body can do better. I believe we can afford to go to zero this year. You know, we always have vehicles. We can always find shells to put good ideas into. I believe we have strong bipartisan support to eliminate the sales tax on food. We've got to provide more relief, and we need to do it faster. And we have time. The Department of Revenue says they need 30 days. Streamlined sales tax says you got to give 30 days notice. If you talk to the Kansas Retailers Association, they say 30 days is plenty of time for them. They're ready to do this. In fact, the Retailers Association said they'd rather do it all at once than phase it out over 3 years. So I believe zero relief in 2022 is just unacceptable. So I'm supporting this bill today, urge you to vote yes, but let's keep working and provide some more tax relief. Kansans need it today. Let's work to get to zero. We still got more time. Vote yes today, but let's keep working on this. We got to give Kansans some relief in 2022.
Does any other member wish to speak to this report? Seeing none, Representative, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Body, thank you for your discussion. Thank you for your thoughts. One of the predominant things I've been hearing from multiple members at the well is we need relief. We need relief, and we need it now. We need it in 22. The original House position was to do it in July 1st. The Senate would not accept that. And I'd like to remind the body that, you know, the governor came out and requested that we pass the Axe the Food Tax plan by Kansas Day 3 months ago. But remember, we could have had this 3 years ago. 2019, this body passed House Bill 2033. It reduced the sales tax on food. It had the marketplace facilitator piece in it. It had a lot of legislation in it. Guess what? Every single piece of that legislation that got vetoed has now become law, except the reduction in food tax. With the mechanism that was in House Bill 2033, depending on what start date you would have used, but right now, today, our state rate on food would be either 2.9 or 1.5, depending on which base year you use with that. But as of January 1st of 2023, the start date for this bill, estimates on House Bill 2033, it would have been 0. We could have had food sales tax relief for the last 3 years. It was vetoed. We've heard some comments about we need 0% on our borders. I live 1 mile from Colorado. I know what the competition is on going out of state. Colorado has zero local and 0 state. I don't believe the incentive to lure people from Missouri is going to work because we cannot make local cities and counties, any other sales tax authorities go to 0. We're still going to be at 2.5, 3, 3.5, whatever the cumulative amount of those sales tax rates are. If you've got a state, a neighboring state, that's completely at 0, explain to me how that's going to incentivize. Come on over to Kansas and purchase your groceries where our state rate's 0. Oh, you still have to pay 3.5% or whatever the local rates are. We will get there. That was discussed in committee. The streamlined sales tax membership that Kansas has been a part of may not be relevant anymore. We need to study that. We need to look at what the benefits are, what the costs are. If we can get out of that agreement, that opens up a lot of things that we can do with our sales tax code. I do appreciate everyone's time and the thoughts that you've put into this. I know when I first had our first tax meeting this year, there was multiple ideas. There is literally an infinite number of ways that you can create this policy. You can adjust different rates. You can start it at different dates. You can implement different exclusions. We could increase our current food sales tax rebate program. Lots of different ways. This is ultimately what we came up with. One of the things that I look at, and we know that tax committee gets plenty of requests for sales tax exemptions. I treated this the same way. One thing I look at when it comes to the fiscal note is what are we accomplishing with this exemption? And what else could we do with this money? I put together a little list here, and I want to ask you to, aside from any political pressure outside this chamber or all the things that are going on in the media, I want you to honestly answer this question for yourself. Which one of these would I prefer to give to Kansans? If we had $500 million to spend, what could we do with that money? Number one, we could completely eliminate our motor fuel tax. We could reduce property tax, the 20 mills that the state currently has in statute, to 7 mills. We could reduce the entire statewide rate by about 1%. We could give every man, woman, and child, if you take $500 million and divide it by the current state population, with just a little bit under 3 million people, and give every single person in this state $170.19. That's every year. If you're going to spend $500 million a year, that's what it's doing every year. My favorite, you could increase the standard deduction on income tax by 160%. If you're single right now, your standard deduction is $3,500, that would go to $8,000. If you're married filing joint, you're currently at $9,100, that would go to $20,800. We have chosen to reduce and eventually eliminate the sales tax on food. That will touch everyone in the state. It is widespread. For the most part, it treats everyone fairly. Multiple studies show that the more money you make, the more you spend on food, but not really that much. So it's a fair, equal tax relief program for all Kansans. I ask for your support for this bill. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I move to adopt the Conference Committee report on House Bill 2106.
This constitutes final action on House Bill 2106. The clerk will open the roll. You may record your vote. Has every member had the opportunity to record their vote? The clerk will close the roll. Does any member desire to explain his or her vote? Representative Stocksdale.
Mr. Speaker, I vote yes on House Bill 2106 because I guess crumbs are better than nothing. By passing this bill, we're blowing a chance to keep hundreds of thousands of Kansans shopping in Kansas. We're blowing a chance to incentivize 1.2 million Missourians to come across state line and shop in Kansas. We are also blowing an opportunity to keep hundreds of millions of dollars in the pockets of Kansas all across our state, money which they could spend on other products and services here in Kansas. I will bite my cheek and vote yes on this bill, but it is maddening and disappointing that this body is happy to settle for a bunt when we could have hit a home run. Thank you.
Representative Sawyer.
Mr. Speaker, I reluctantly vote yes on House Bill 2106. I wish this was an immediate cut to 0%. I wish we responsibly used the $3.1 billion in excess revenue, and I wish we listened to our constituents in every corner of the state who asked for tax relief this year. Unfortunately, this body has moved forward with a watered-down version of what we could have and should have put forward, a 0% state sales tax on food beginning July 1, 2022. We need to revisit this tax rate for a more aggressive decrease. With this expectation, I vote yes on House Bill 2106. Representative Sawyer, Curtis, Moore, Hoy, Ballard, Clayton, Wynn, Featherston, Poskin, Byers, Ruiz, Amix, Neighbor, Finney, Henderson, Schmidt, Weigel, and Carlin.
Representative Prost for explanation of vote.
Mr. Speaker, I vote yes on House Bill 2106. This body wasted 108 days and spent nearly all $3.1 billion in excess revenue instead of helping 2.9 million Kansans who would benefit from direct tax relief. This body played politics with Kansans' money. There has been so much opining this year about the stresses of inflation and gas prices, yet when push came to shove, partisan games won. This bill is nothing but a package of political junk to provide cover until a Republican governor is in office. I vote yes on House Bill 2106. We need a 0% tax on food now. Representative Hsu, Meyer, Osman,
Representative Keither for an explanation of vote.
Mr. Speaker, I vote no on House Bill 2106. Kansas has record-breaking excess revenue. We can afford an immediate elimination of the state sales tax on food. House Bill 2106 is cumbersome to small businesses and will result in minuscule benefits to Kansas families during a time they need tax relief. While I support the principle of a food tax cut, this is a poor plan. We can do better. We owe it to our constituents who have asked us all session for direct tax relief, not partial cuts stretched over 3 years. I cannot support House Bill 2106. Representative Keither.
Any further explanation of vote? Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am proud to vote yes on this legislation today. It's past time for Kansas to lower and eliminate the sales tax on food. Kansas families are already being hit hard enough with rising inflation and a high cost of living. This move is important not only today, but is also essential for ensuring the future of our state.
Further explanation of vote. Does any member desire to change his or her vote? Seeing none, with 114 voted in favor, 3 against, the passes of House Bill 2106, the same having received a constitutional majority, the bill is hereby declared passed. The clerk will record the vote. Speaker recognizes Representative Patton for a motion to concur on House Bill 2495.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Senate substitute for House Bill 2495 fixes an engrossing error on House Bill 2299. So let me explain what happened. On April 1st, we passed House Bill 2299 here, 110-3 out of the House chamber. It was shortly thereafter signed by the governor. In that process, though, the language that was transmitted was not exactly the same as the language we passed. So the governor didn't sign the exact language that we passed. So this bill, Senate substitute for House Bill 2495, fixes that. For those of you that want to refresh your memory of what House Bill 2299 was, that was the law enforcement bundle that we passed out of House Judiciary. It included the KBI Federal Rat-Back Program. It required DCF to share information with law enforcement. It expanded the jurisdiction of law enforcement, and it prohibited Parks and Wildlife from conducting surveillance on private property. So again, passed 110-3 on April 1st. Just a little technical issue when it moved over to the governor, and she didn't sign the same bill we passed. So we want to get that fixed. Fix that engrossing error, so that's what this does, Mr. Speaker. And with that, I move that the House concur in Senate amendments to Senate substitute for House Bill 2495. I'll stand for questions.
Representative Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ditto. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, Representative, you may close.
I close.
This constitutes final action on House Bill 2495. The clerk will open the roll and you may record your vote. Has every member had the opportunity to record their vote? The clerk will close the roll. Does any member desire to explain his or her vote? Does any member desire to change his or her vote? Representative Resman votes aye. With 116 voted in favor, 1 against the passage of House Bill 2495, the same had received a constant majority. The bill is hereby declared passed. The clerk will record the vote. Speaker recognizes Representative Laneware for motion to adopt the Conference Room report on Senate Bill 34.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At this time, I would like to adopt the Conference Committee report on SB 34. Senate Bill 34 is a Conference Committee report that new Section 1, the governmental entity public official require face mask, is a may recommend. Section 2, no governmental entity public official shall A, issue COVID vaccine passport without consent, B, require use of passport for any purpose, or C, deny housing, refuse access to public space, separate individuals based on vaccination status. Screening protocols are okay. Section 3 amends KSA 48925 of KEMA, that the governor shall not have the authority under KEMA or any other law to require face masks as a response to a contagious infectious disease. Civil action challenging executive orders issued under this section changes requirement for court to issue order on petition for 7 days to without unreasonable delay. Amends KSA 48932 to add that the governmental entity, public official shall not have the authority under KEMA or any other law to require face masks as a response to a contagious infectious disease. Civil action challenging actions taken by local governments issued under this section changes requirement for court to issue order on petition from 7 days to without unreasonable delay. Section 5 amends KSA 65-129B, striking the provision that would have allowed KDHE Secretary or Order Sheriff to assist in the execution or enforcement of any order under this section, seek evaluation and treatment or isolation quarantine. Section 6 amends KSA 65201. Local health officer can't order face masks. Civil action challenging orders issued by local health officer issued under this section changes requirements for court to issue order on petition from 7 days to without unreasonable delay. Section 7 amends KSA 726262, which allows tests or inoculations to be required to attend school, to specify that a test inoculation cannot be deemed necessary by the Secretary unless it has received full FDA approval for the age of student required to receive the test inoculation. I'll be happy to stand for questions.
For discussion, Representative Hawkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to start out by saying when I look out here, I see nothing but friends. We have a lot of good friends here. I am neither the debater of my friend from Riverside and Wichita, nor an orator like my friend from Ottawa. I wish I had the ability that each of those have, but I just have to do what God gave me, just have to do with what God gave me. I want to talk a little bit about where we've come from, maybe just a little bit of a history lesson. You know, back in 2020, we left in a hasty, quick fashion from our house duties because of the onset of COVID. Almost immediately after we left, a mask mandate was put into place. And we wore masks for a long time. Matter of fact, we came back in 2021 and we wore masks through most of the session. We even spread apart. We had people up in the galleries. That was a very difficult time for everybody. Nobody was happy during that time. I can't think of anybody on either side of the aisle that was happy about what we were doing. We had businesses closed. Our governor closed down businesses and hurt our economy, placed our economy in peril. And then, lo and behold, the vaccinations start. Government starts requiring vaccinations for certain things. Businesses required vaccinations, even up to the point until the courts finally stepped in. We had churches closed, which is why we did a bill just a little bit ago, making sure that churches can no longer be closed by our government. I say all these things because we all have to think back to how much we hated what we were going through. We despised what we were going through. We still have folks that are wearing masks, and I applaud them for wearing the mask if they believe that they have to have a mask on. I think that you should wear a mask if you feel like you need to wear a mask. But most of us don't want to have a mask on. Most of us, it's not only an inconvenience, but it's just a downright intrusion into our life. And every one of us, and I'm really kind of speaking for those on the Republican side, because I can't speak for those on the Democrat side, but you are my friends. We didn't want to wear a mask. We didn't want to be vaccinated. We did not want our businesses closed down, our churches closed down, and we despised it. And that's why we're here today with this bill. Is this bill a perfect bill? I think when you look at our caucus or our calendar meeting, you would say it's not a perfect bill. But what bill is perfect? Do we write perfect bills? Sometimes we do get it right, we really do. Sometimes we get some really good bills. Sometimes we mess things up. But most times, bills are what they are. They have imperfections, and we deal with those. This bill has imperfections. It has things you may not like. But guess what? It makes it to where we don't have to have a mask. Nobody in government can make us wear a mask if we pass this bill. Nobody can force us to have a vaccine passport or be forced to take a vaccine. This bill does a lot about what we want. And although you may not want to vote for it, I think you will each agree with what we went through. This bill at least gives us some assurance that we won't have to go through it exactly like we did before. I implore you all to think through this and don't discount this bill. This is our chance to set things right. This is our chance to make sure it doesn't happen to us again and to our countrymen, our fellow citizens out in the state of Kansas who so desperately want us to do something. We are here to do something. This is our chance to do something. Don't lose this chance. Vote yes. Thank you.
Representative Epley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's been a long road back from this pandemic that we've all been through. We've all suffered with a lot of pandemic fatigue. I would even go so far as to say exhaustion at this point. We've heard some of the heartfelt comments from people that have gone through this. You know, I get it, I understand it, I've lived it as a physician. You know, I've been through the fatigue with my patients, I've been through the backlash, I've had the conversations about face masks, and as I rise tonight, I tell you, there's a lot of parts of this bill I like, but the rollback on face masks is just a step too far for me because of the unintended consequences that we've got to talk about very briefly tonight. I wish that it was a world where everyone was responsible and everyone would wear face masks responsibly when they need to or when they want to. But the fact is, we live in a world where, and I live in a world as a physician, where human nature takes over and people don't always do the responsible thing. And it has untoward consequences that are terrible for the population as a whole, and many of you know that deep in your heart. So it really boils down to what, as a physician, you do. You reflex to your specialists that you use every day, people that live this every day, much more than I do as a primary care physician. Every specialist that I utilize in the state of Kansas, in Stormont Vale, at KU Med Center, in Mosaic Hospital in St. Joe, all the infectious disease consultants were and in strong support of face mask mandates in certain situations. Nobody likes them, I hate them, but there are times when they're necessary. So let's talk about, do face masks really work? I heard in Calendar tonight or caucus that face masks don't work. The only ones that work are N95. They've done extensive studies on this from CDC, and the facts are out, and they're clear that all face masks do work to some extent. And here are the data, and it's been quoted over and over by CDC in the last month. N95 masks prevent 83% transmission of COVID-19. Surgical masks like this is not an N95 mask, this is a surgical mask. This is what we wear in surgery, is a mask like this. It prevents about 63% transmission of COVID-19 virus. Mask requirements, again, because of episodes like avian flu. You just need to be aware of this. There's also situations in agriculture where you have to wear face masks. You're going to hear about this, I think, from some other conferees. And also in prisons. There's just circumstances where we have to have face mask requirements. And this bill, in this particular segment, just doesn't address that. And finally, schools. What about schools? We went through this. You know, everybody hated virtual school. God, I hated virtual school. Nobody wanted virtual school. It was terrible. So our only alternative was to get kids back in person, in school, but with face masks. And then there were problems. There was face mask mouth, there was face mask mental health issues. I know about it. I heard about it as a school board member. I get it. But there was no alternative if we were going to have in-person education, and that's what I wanted, was in-person education. Dr. Bryant, who's the head of infectious disease for pediatrics throughout the United States, said this simply: in schools, at the beginning of school in August, we had to have face mask mandates because at that time the diminishing Delta and the increasing Omicron variants. Now, as we go back to the mean, which means as we go back to less virulence with this virus, and we're seeing much less virulence, let's be honest. How many of y'all have a face mask on? Nobody. So we're going back to the median on this virus, and as we do, the virulence is less. We don't need face masks. And most of the face mask mandates are gone. But I'm just saying for the record, there are exceptions to this rule that need to be made. And because of that, I think I cannot vote for this bill tonight, and I think it needs to have some work in this specific area. I'll just conclude and let others talk. You know, we have Samuel Crumbine, who's the great father of public health in the state of Kansas and certainly even in the United States. He's a great leader. His statue's across the street in front of KHI, and he made a great quote that I want you to bear in mind that says, "The health of each of us depends on the health of all of us." And I think we need to hang together on this, and I think this does need some more work. I think if we take this and go back and look at making it only for COVID-19, I think that's a face mask mandate rollback that we could live with. But for all infectious diseases, it's just a boat too far. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Proctor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in strong support of this CCR. You know, when I'm not here and I'm not in the restaurant, I also teach at Wichita State in the Homeland Security program. My wife says I need to pick a job and stick to it, but I teach at Wichita State. One of the classes I teach at Wichita State is the history of Homeland Security. What it really is it's the history of how America has dealt with internal threats, how America responds when it feels threatened. Our history as a country is pretty dismal when people feel like their personal security is at risk. I can tell you that from the perspective of history, the way future historians are going to look at the way that we as a nation surrendered our rights because we were afraid is not going to be a bright spot in our history. I agree with a lot of what my colleague from Atchison said in terms of, you know, common sense precautions to protect yourself from infectious disease. I'm not anti-mask and I'm not anti-mandate. Or I'm not anti-mask, I'm not anti-vaccine. I'm anti-mandate. When government starts infringing on people's individual rights, no matter how good the cause, no matter how good the explanation or the reason, we're diminished as a nation, we're diminished as a people. We walk by every day, when we walk into this building, we walk by a sign that has a quote from the Kansas Constitution. It says, "All political power is inherent in the people." I wasn't in this building on May 21st, 2020, when this body was wrestling with how to, use duct tape and baling wire and patch together something to rein in the unchecked, unrestrained powers that the governor was wielding through executive orders. I was standing out there with the people, demanding that this body do something, and this body did do something. It wasn't perfect, but it gave the counties the ability to opt out until we could come back here as a body in 2021 and do something more permanent. But there are still a lot of unaddressed issues that are going to come back again. Maybe next year, maybe 100 years from now. But I want these measures in place, if for no other reason than to speak to those future historians that we saw that we had done something wrong and we did something to repair the damage. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Chuck Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In calendar, we went over this bill, and it didn't feel like it was ready. I thought we stumbled along, and I felt there were some things that just weren't good. I just felt like it needed to be worked on a little bit more. While I was in that meeting, two people from the Department of Corrections called me and say, hey, we need masks in these prisons. So I hate masks personally. But like I say, in some events, they need to be used. I think my daughter Lori, often talk to her about schools. She hates masks. But if the school board says we're going to do it, I think the school board should have the right to do it. And like I say, the Department of Corrections, two guys called me, and so I'll be voting no on this bill. I just don't think it's quite ready. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Francis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The previous representative kind of stole my thunder on this a little bit. I was also contacted by the Department of Corrections. I think their concerns also pertain to the jails across the state. You know, this law is designed for individual rights. There are certain situations across this state where we still have to protect those that are protecting us. I think our prisons and our jails are one of those. The agency expressed to me that they've got significant concerns about the impact of this on their facilities, and that pre-COVID, they had mask requirements in certain situations. You know, we focus so much right now on COVID. There's more out there than just COVID. And some of the things we have to deal with in our prisons where everybody lives next to each other, where they're all crammed together, where sometimes people do willingly want to hurt others. We have to be concerned about things like tuberculosis, flu. There will be new respiratory illnesses that come out in the future, and we will not be in session at that moment to deal with some of those. Children in juvenile facilities suffer from pertussis, thank you. You know, these issues go on and on. I mean, I think this bill could be fixed. I think it can address some of these issues, but I have serious concerns with where it is right now. We've got an obligation to our workers in the prisons and the jails across this state for them to be protected also. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Ruiz. Representative Heiberger.
Well, you didn't want to wear a mask, and you didn't want to get a vaccine. Neither did I. I don't know anybody else who did. I also didn't want my fellow citizens to die of an infectious disease. 2 years ago, we were facing the biggest public health disaster in this country in 100 years. I'm going to say something that got jeers from the gallery during our special session. And I think that even in the freest society, there comes a time when every citizen must make some sacrifice for the public good. And if we don't believe that, if we don't all believe that, our democracy is in trouble. That's what I think.
Representative Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, everybody's a patriot at the well tonight. You know, government has one job, and that's to protect the liberty of the people. When I came to this chamber 2 years ago, one of the first things I said at the well was that we do not suspend the Constitution in a pandemic, especially in the pandemic, in a pandemic, in a crisis. The Constitution stands. And yet, for the last 2 years, our liberties have been eroded consistently. We are losing our liberty further and faster than we ever have in history. Legislators, leadership, the governor, KDHE, anyone in power do not have the right to trade away our freedoms, to negotiate with them for political purposes. Here's a story. A few months ago, I got a call from a couple moms in Ness City. They're on the school board, both of them, and their 8th graders were threatened with arrest because they refused to get a COVID test. Now let's really think about that. This is small, rural Kansas. We don't even have a stoplight. And because these 8th graders refused to get COVID tested, their parents were called to be arrested because now the school wants to take them off of school property because now they're trespassing. That's chapter 65 in our statute, my friends. And that's part of the issue that this bill deals with. That's scary. Chapter 65 gives the government the right to mandatorily quarantine its citizens. Anybody seen the news lately and seen what's happening in Shanghai? That's chapter 65 in Kansas and what could be. This is not the Kansas that I want to live in. And it's not the Kansans my constituents want to live in, worrying about their children being arrested or mandatorily quarantined, or they themselves being mandatorily quarantined because some government entity or some KDHE officer thinks that they're a risk to the rest of the public. This bill is not perfect. As a matter of fact, it's not strong enough. But it's better than nothing. And right now, Kansans are crying out for us to protect their liberty in their health, in their elections. It's why they sent us here. And here we are. What time is it? 10:30, 11 o'clock at night? Kansans voters right now, I can tell you, they're on YouTube, and they're going to pay attention to what happens to this vote tonight. A vote against this bill will put your election in jeopardy. I appreciate the people that came to the Capitol this last week. I appreciate the people that came to the Capitol last October crying out for us to have that special session. I appreciate all the calls and all the emails, people desperate. Please protect our liberty. We the people are awake, is what they've said. And tonight, this could be the most important vote you take in your political career. Vote wisely. Vote for liberty. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Proctor for the second time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't do this. I don't come up twice. I said my piece, but I wanted to address something that a couple of my colleagues on my side of the aisle came up here and said, concerns that they had heard from the Secretary of Corrections about our prisons and an outbreak or something, tuberculosis in our prisons and the need for masks. So my city to a lot of people in and out of this state, the name is practically synonymous with prisons. I have a ton of corrections officers in my town. My colleague from Lansing has a corrections facility in his district, which was the hottest hotspot in the state of Kansas for COVID. We were shipping COVID patients from all over the state to Lansing Correctional Facility. Neither me nor the representative from Lansing has gotten anything from the Secretary of Corrections about an outbreak of tuberculosis in our prison. By the way, we were all on a conference call last week with Secretary Zamuda and the new warden of the prison, Warden Cheeks, and nobody mentioned to either of us that there was any kind of health emergency at the corrections facility. Now, I am not besmirching the honor or the integrity of anybody at the Department of Corrections, but it is certainly a precisely targeted email at 11 o'clock at night from the Secretary of Corrections when this is being considered that did not come to two representatives that clearly have an intense interest in the safety and welfare of our inmates and of our corrections officers. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Francis for the second time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And if I misspoke, I apologize. I know of no outbreak of tuberculosis at this time in our prison system. But what the email to us did say, that the reason they need masking is because they do have outbreaks of diseases such as tuberculosis, influenza, pertussis, and things like that. You know, this bill can be fixed, or it can be made much better in a very short time. You know, often at the end of the session, we put a lot of things together. We're trying to get out of here. There's a lot of compromises. I think this is one of those bills that, with a few additional safeguards put in it for some of the obvious things that we can pick up in a very short manner of time, we can protect most of the people across the state and make a much better bill. And for that reason, I would make a substitute motion that the conference committee report not be adopted and a new conference committee be appointed.
This is a debatable motion. Representative Hauser.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, you know, I'm going to say I want you to vote against this motion. You know, we don't even need this underlying bill. I'm going to vote for it, but we don't need it. You know what liberty is? Liberty is saying no to an unconstitutional act. We never had the authority. Nobody had the constitutional authority that did what they did back in 2020. This underlying bill, we should have done it back in 2020. But here we are doing it this late in the game. That's cool, I'll vote for it, but we don't need it. Like I said, we already have the power, we the people. We're the ones that run the show. And we're duty bound to non-comply or nullify an unconstitutional act. So I just want to enlighten you on that little fact and ask you to vote no on this motion. Thank you.
Representative Esau.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll echo what my colleague just said. We shouldn't need this bill. We probably should have addressed it at least in 21. Perhaps in 2020 we didn't know enough yet, but in 21 we did. We could have done it in January. We could have done it in February. We could have done it in March. And here we are about to possibly adjourn for a while, and we still haven't done it. It's time to tell the people that we agree. They have freedoms. Those freedoms should be respected. And we can come back in one of these mini sessions that we may be having next and fix the shortcomings that may be in this conference committee report. But I'm not willing to risk that we won't get the conference committee report back. So I'm going to vote no on the motion. I'm voting yes on the conference committee report. If there are concerns about the prisons, if there are concerns about any other issues, we can deal with them. We have the ability to do that. We've done it before when there's been an issue and we've needed to come up with a bill or a conference committee. And I have every faith that we can pull that off. Thank you.
Representative Finch.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the body. I rise in opposition to the motion to not adopt the conference committee report. I ask that you vote no on the motion. We have had a lot of time and a lot of work over the years spent on COVID response. We have heard from a lot of citizens across the state about concerns about mandates. We have heard of schools recently in the Johnson County area that have imposed mask mandates on children based on flu symptoms. And it has become a standard operating procedure to use these kind of mask mandates. We also have another fix in this bill that is necessary. The law that we passed that allowed for court challenges for plaintiffs who were aggrieved by mandates issued under emergency declaration. We had a court in Johnson County, again, that tried to strike down that law as unconstitutional, and part of that was the response time for the court, and this bill addresses that concern. This bill addresses vaccine passports, another issue that is of critical importance to people. And it draws what I think is the right distinction on childhood vaccines in that it says if the FDA has not granted final approval, then KDHE cannot mandate that a child has to take a vaccine that has not been fully approved by the FDA. These are measures that many Kansans would find common sense. They would find reasonable under the circumstances, and as compared to perhaps going further, as some might want, or maybe not going far enough in the minds of others, politics is the art of the possible. This is the product of compromise by our health committee trying to find a middle ground that we can live with and address those concerns. And I think as such, it deserves real consideration here and fair approval. We're in the waning days of this veto session. There's not a lot of vehicles left. There's not a lot of time left. And so I would urge you to vote down this motion and vote yes on the bill, and let's move this forward in the process. We've heard from the public that they want some action on these issues, so please join me in voting down the motion and voting yes on the underlying CCR. Thank you.
Representative Susan Rees.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Body, I come and rise to offer support to the motion to rework this bill. There's some pretty scary things in here. And when we talk about infectious diseases, we're talking about, in the bill, it talks about all infectious diseases. Do we know what those are? Measles, mumps, rubella, chickenpox, pertussis, diphtheria, and TB. All of these airborne diseases that can result in serious illness, complications, and death. They're all very easily transmissible. And there are special masks that you can wear, especially like if you have TB or to be around somebody who has that. We have an outbreak going on now. We also don't know what this is going to mean to the prisons. What is it going to mean to the staff in the prisons? They're contacting us and saying they have a lot of concerns about this. What about juvenile detention centers? What about the schools? And what effect is this going to have on workforce safety? If there's an outbreak in a correctional facility or schools and public health officials cannot do their jobs, how can we stop the spread of disease? We need to spend more time with this. We need to really understand what are the implications to this. We haven't had enough time to do this. I believe this was rushed. And I ask that you vote yes on the motion and no on the bill.
Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, Representative, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want everybody to know I understand about liberty and our right to make our own choices. You know, the simple fix on this thing is a thing that protects the plumber in the prison. It protects the jailer in the prison. It protects the custodian in the prison. They don't have the choices we have when we decide whether we're going to go to McDonald's tonight or we're going to take a trip to Florida. You know, we pay them, we force them to work 24/7. This is a very simple fix. This is the one that I know about, the one that I've been contacted about. You know, we have a hard time getting workers in our correctional system. You know, part of it is it's a rough job. You get spit on, you get things thrown at you. If you think that they're going to willingly wear masks when they go to the commissary and things like that if they're ill, I think you're mistaken. I think it's time for us to fix this thing now. If we don't fix this thing now, it's going to be a problem until we return, and then it's not going to be any easier to fix. So with that, I move my motion.
Reminder, a yes vote on the Francis motion will send this back to conference, and a new conference committee will be appointed. A no vote puts us back on the conference committee report. All those in favor of the Francis amendment, say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. No. Those appear to have it, and those do have it. We're back on the report. Representative Featherston.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There was mention made earlier of a swift departure made from here in January 2020, how people didn't know what was going on and it was a rush to get out. And we forget what that was like. So let me walk you back to the spring of 2020 and let me ask you, how many of you had to think about dividing your household to quarantine your spouse so they would perhaps not kill you and your children if they came home sick from work? How many of you had to think about rewriting your will so you would not be left a penniless widow because your spouse was on the front line at work every single day, facing a disease we did not quite know how to control? I'm guessing that number is pretty darn small, but I'll tell you it's at least one, and that's me. Do you know what it is to look in the eyes of your husband? Well, he tells you he thinks there's no chance he's going to avoid it, and he's afraid of dying. A man who's been to war and sat in the desert to protect this country wasn't particularly afraid of dying then, is afraid of dying now. Well, I know, and it's sad, and it's heartbreaking. Do you know what it is to say to your adult children you cannot return to college because our mission in life now is to keep your grandparents alive so they will see their other grandchildren? I know what that is. That was our family mission. We will proceed with the greatest amount of caution to keep my parents alive, to see my sister's children again. How many of us in this chamber are physicians? Nurses? Who's got a degree in public health? Who's an infectious disease specialist? Not too many. Not me. I probably have an inside track, but I didn't go to med school. I just sat alongside and helped fund it. How prideful it is of all of us to think that we know better than specialists in these fields who trained for years upon years, who do continuing ed every year. How prideful of us. How many of us are in local government? How many of us say we support local government? A lot of us do. I sit on the local government committee. I hear all the time, we should respect our local governments. How prideful and irresponsible and disingenuous of each of us to say we respect local control and then take it away. Those of you that are familiar with the Bible are familiar with pridefulness. It doesn't lead to good things. I advise you to stay in your own lane and vote no.
Representative Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We started this adventure today over 12 hours ago, and in that time period, my home has received something we haven't had for several months. Rain. Rain. Also had a little hail, but rain. Thank you, Lord, for the rain. As I've been sitting here today listening to everybody's impassioned pleas of one bill or the other, and like many, get a phone call about the possibility of what's in this bill. Get the briefing, a lot of good things or some concerns. I want to talk just a little bit about the impact of agriculture. And there's some concerns. What if we have a foreign animal disease outbreak in some of our herds? What happens? You know, to give maybe the Secretary of Agriculture or someone that ability for mask mandates. But we're in that type of situation, a lot of time the federal government takes over other things and folks just use common sense. And I think that's the bottom line of this bill, colleagues, is common sense. This is something that many of us have looked for the last 2 years. And now it's time for lessons learned. In this past session, I've asked a lot of folks to come before the Agriculture Committee, what did we learn? What did we learn from COVID? The National Agri-Biodefense Lab coming to Manhattan. Some folks have concerns about that. That's a federal situation. To me, this is a little bit like the sales tax debate we just had, where sometimes we don't listen all the way through. We cannot tell the federal government what to and cannot do. If MBAF or others have decisions, or your local farm service agency or Natural Resources Conservation Service, as part of the federal government, say they must wear masks, they will probably have to wear masks. We can't tell the feds what to do. As I said, there are some concerns about this. Has it been vetted enough? Does it go far enough with some of our liberty and freedom? Our colleague from Ness continues to tell us that and appreciate that. But it's a place to start. And at this late hour of our session, yes, in a perfect world, we would have all the days to vet. But I'll remind you, 3 weeks ago, I came to the floor about a bill that was favorable in both the House, Senate, and the governor when it comes to our fencing supplies. Everybody agreed, but it took the last day to get it passed. Moments ago, the governor sent out a press release about the food sales tax. She said it was a win for every single Kansan. Well, colleagues, I would suggest you vote yes on this. I believe this could be a win for every single Kansan. With that, Mr. Speaker, I ask you support me in voting for Senate Bill 34. Thank you.
Representative Haswood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On that note of agriculture, that being the backbone of our state, from an agriculture perspective, foreign animal disease investigations, animal health, veterinarians wear safety PPE to prevent spread or exposure, to prevent potential viruses, and whatever else comes in the future. These diseases were considered infectious and potentially zoonotic, but can be spread between humans and animals. Now, I want to touch on something that we all really care about is the economy. We need healthy Kansans to have a healthy economy. These public health measures are in place to catch things when they're early. We were all very happy to keep our meat packaging plants open during this pandemic, and agriculture being a $1 million export into our state. This is something that we need to protect. Public health emergency orders save lives, save our economy, and many farmers and ranchers and producers serve in this body today that can very well feel the importance of these. Now, these infectious diseases are not just COVID. Measles are so infectious that when you walk into a room of 100 unvaccinated people, 90 people will get measles. People with measles or any of these diseases that are airborne or spread via droplets need to isolate and wear a mask. These things are taken seriously. We don't know what's going to be in the future. And as someone who has been to public health school, we need to take these into consideration, and this is not a light decision that we take. I urge you to vote no. Thank you.
Representative Penn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The CDC is inept. Dr. Birx is off looking for another scarf. Dr. Walensky admitted, she said the quiet part, that it's all about turning the screws to make sure that we control the population. And Fauci is a flip-flopping fraud. A whole 2 years later, he's pulling up to the cameras right now, gearing up to declare the next bout of 2 weeks to flatten the curve. All while the people's constitutional rights consent to be governed, their individual health freedoms and their right to unencumbered mobility, and the consent on how they're going to do all that is what's truly being flattened. If you think that this bill will preclude or supersede federal masking or OSHA safety requirements, I ask you to fall back on your common sense as you heard. Visit the airport, go through the TSA checkpoint, go to any of our military bases, and see the federal constitutional authority in action. All the hair on fire declarations of doom, gloom, and death are worn out and played at this point. Nothing that we've heard tonight prevents an individual from choosing themselves to wear a mask. That includes prison guards, that includes inmates, that includes healthcare workers, that includes literally anyone else. And if their masks work, why must I be forced to wear one? How about we trust the people to be responsible to protect their own health, exercise their religions, run their businesses, and move without traveling papers and muzzles? Our citizens deserve, at the very least, ladies and gentlemen, the same liberty exercised by the members present here in this chamber, whose unmasked faces I love to see. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Neighbor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One of the former representatives that spoke asked how many doctors were in the House, how many nurses were in the House, how many medical personnel were in the House. There are some, but they're not a lot. And for those of you who are not in the medical profession, you are not experts. You have not been trained with the many years of education and knowledge that medical personnel have. We can make assumptions. We would like to assume that everybody in this House has integrity, or the integrity to go to someone and say, I haven't been vaxxed, I realize you're wearing a mask, is it for a certain reason? That's because we either have feelings one way or the other, or that's what I assume. But I have been in gatherings with those who have chosen not to wear a mask and have not been vaxxed, and yet know that there are people in the room who have a heart condition, they're a transplant patient, they're immune compromised, but they don't share that information. And so what they are doing is jeopardizing everyone else. We have a representative in this House that recently received a kidney. It took years, and she was on a transplant list. She had to ask. She had to ask, have you been vaxxed? And these people don't say. They're around people after they've had COVID, no mask. And they don't say it because they don't have the respect for who's sitting across from them, who's at the table with them, who is next to them. Now, I know we all have our feelings about whether you wear a mask or whether you're vaxxed. I respect your decision, but not all of you are honest in sharing that information. And that's even with the people here in this body that you see every day. I would be afraid to see what you did out in the public. We have people in here that if they get a communicable disease, COVID, whatever it may be, they're not going to make it, guys. You know that, and I know that. And if you don't, you need to do some homework. I was at a breakfast meeting with a group. This person had had open heart surgery 4 months before, could not get infected with COVID, could not be around anybody that wasn't vaxxed. Out of simple regard for the people around you, she asked, has everybody been vaxxed? The representative sat at the table, looked around, didn't say anything for about 3 or 4 minutes, and finally said, oh, I'll move. That was a death sentence for her if she got COVID. You talk about kids that have asthma. You talk about kids that have Crohn's disease. If a child is in a classroom and a classmate gets Crohn's disease, has Crohn's disease, that child can die from chickenpox or measles or mumps. And they end up going to the doctor every time a child comes in with chickenpox or measles or mumps. and they're getting immunoglobulin shots. Every time, they're only good for about a month. Is that fair? No, because someone does not have the regard for those around them. We want to say that we respect our neighbors, that we respect our team members, but we don't all follow those rules, and that's sad. We don't have the respect for somebody sitting next to us to at least be honest. I don't care what your position is, but be honest and don't contaminate somebody else because you're putting their life on the line. We also know that we have a representative here that has a severe heart condition. Have you told him you're not vaxxed? Have you told her you're not vaxxed? No. Why not? Are you ashamed? I mean, you have the right not to do it. That is certainly your right. But out of simple respect, concern for your neighbor, your teammate, a family member, whomever it may be, you need to have respect. You need to have the integrity to be honest. And it really bothers me that we have those in this body that don't have that respect for their fellow House members. That is wrong. So when you're thinking about this isn't just about liberty. This is about being honest with those around you and protecting those that are around you as well as yourself. Because if you don't have respect and integrity for those around you, you don't have it for anyone. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Donahoe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to mention to people that what you are asking for with this bill and everything, what you're asking for is the ability or the right to yell fire in a theater. And, you know, we know that's not right. And the point is that part of the discussion that I went through this morning was the fact of rights, the individual rights, and how far they extended, and the fact that they didn't extend to the point where you jeopardized other people's rights. So that's what we're doing with this situation. It's like, I've got freedom. I have the freedom to do whatever I want. You can't take away my freedom, but you have to remember there are restrictions to that freedom. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Dotson.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. I'll make this brief. We've talked about bills that have some issues, bills that are never perfect. I think this bill is fatally flawed. And the reason is because if you read the bill in several places, it says government entities. We have government entities, INBAF in Manhattan, Kansas, Fort Riley, McConnell Air Force Base, and on and on and on in our airports. So what are we going to do there? Second thing I would say is this was a temporary emergency measure. Who's wearing a mask right now? So we've pretty much figured this out. Third thing I would say is I worry about the United States sometimes because I'm afraid we've forgotten what sacrifice means. World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq, people sacrificed, families sacrificed. Sometimes you've got to do a lot of sacrificing to maintain the United States of America. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, Representative, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm not sure that there's a whole lot more to say on this bill, so I would say that, I just close on this, don't I?
Just renew your motion.
Okay, I move adoption of Senate Bill 34.
This constitutes final action on Senate Bill 34. The clerk will open the roll and you may record your vote. Has every member had the opportunity to record their vote? The clerk will close the roll. Does any member desire to explain his or her vote? Does any member desire to change his or her vote? Seeing none, 64 voted in favor and 53 against the passage of Senate Bill 34. The same time received a constitutional majority. The bill is hereby declared passed. The clerk will record the vote. The governor's objection to Senate Bill 199 have been read. It is now time has arrived for a House reconsideration of said bill. Is there a motion to reconsider? There being no motion to reconsider, the chair rules that the bill has been reconsidered and the veto is sustained. The governor's objection to Senate Bill 493 having been read, the time has arrived for the House to reconsider the said bill. Is there a motion to reconsider? There being no motion to reconsider, the chair rules the bill has been reconsidered and the veto is sustained. Introductions of bills and concurrent resolutions, the clerk will read.
House Concurrent Resolution Number 5037 by Representatives Reichman, Hawkins, and Sawyer. Concurrent resolution relating to the adjournment of the Senate and House Representatives for a period of time during the 2022 regular session of the Legislature. Be it resolved by the House of Representatives, State of Kansas, the Senate concurring therein, that the Legislature shall adjourn at the close of business of the daily session convened on April 28, 2022, and shall reconvene on May 23, 2022, to conduct all legislative matters and to review and respond to any final decision or order issued by the Kansas Supreme Court in the case of Rivera versus Schwab regarding the constitutionality of the reapportionment United States congressional districts enacted in the 2022 substitute for Senate Bill number 355. Be it further resolved that the Chief Clerk of the House of Representatives and the Secretary of the Senate and employees specified by the Director of Legislative Administrative Services for each such purpose shall attend to their duties each day during periods of adjournment, Sundays excepted, for the purpose of receiving messages from the Governor and conducting such other business as may be required. Be it further resolved that the members of the Legislature not receive the per diem compensation and subsistence allowances provided for in KSA 46137 for any day within a period in which both houses of the Legislature are adjourned for more than 2 days. Be it further resolved that the members of the Legislature attending a legislative meeting of whatever nature, when authorized pursuant to law, or by the Legislative Coordinating Council, the President of the Senate or the Speaker of the House of Representatives, and member of a conference committee attending a meeting of the conference committee authorized by the President of the Senate and the Speaker of the House of Representatives during any period of adjournment for which members are not authorized compensation and allowances pursuant to KSA 46137A and amendments thereto shall receive compensation, subsistence allowances, mileage, and other expenses in amounts prescribed under KSA 753212 and amendments thereto.
Speaker recognizes the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Body, we are in a situation now where we have a court case going on, and so we have to come back to be able to take care of that. On May 16th, the court will start their oral arguments, and we believe by holding off and not coming back until the 23rd, maybe we will have a whole lot better idea when we come back what we're facing. So that is the reason why we're putting that date clear, the date to come back, clear out to May 23rd. With that, Mr. Speaker, I move adoption of 8 CR 5037.
You've heard the motion. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries. Messages from the Senate. The clerk will read.
Announcing the Senate herewith transmits certificate of action by the Senate on Senate substitute for House Bill 2448, an act concerning public assistance requiring able-bodied adults without dependents to complete an employment and training program in order to receive food assistance. The veto message from the governor having been received, a motion was made that notwithstanding the governor's objection to Senate substitute for House Bill 2448, the bill be passed by a vote of 29 yeas and 11 nays. The motion having received the required 2/3 constitutional majority of the members elected or appointed to the Senate voting in the affirmative, the bill passed. The Senate adopts the Commerce Committee report on House Bill 2540.
Are there announcements? Majority Leader Hawkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, body, for hanging in here and having a very civil debate today. I'm proud of every single person in here. With that, Mr. Speaker, I move the House adjourn until May 23rd, Monday, May 23rd at 11 a.m.
You've heard the motion. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. We are adjourned.